Hello, Croiso, Fulcher, welcome back to the channel, Old Boy here, and today we are continuing with our Irish studies. Please remember this is part 6 in a series, and while you can watch this video as a standalone episode, I do recommend you start at episode 1, which you can find here. Today we're going to be looking at the Tower de Hercules, or the Tower of Hercules, which is situated in Galicia, northwestern Spain. We're also going to be looking at how it relates to both Irish and Greek mythology, and we will also be looking at the historical accounts of the tower and how its Roman incarnation may have been based on an earlier, possibly Phoenician, design. With all that being said, let's get into the episode. The Tower de Hercules, or the Tower of Hercules, is the oldest known lighthouse in operation, and it is situated on a peninsula approximately 2.5 kilometres from A Coruña, Galicia, northwestern Spain. The tower itself was originally known as Flavum Brigantium up until the 20th century, with the Latin word farum coming from the Greek pharos, which was an appellation given to the lighthouse of Alexandria. The tower was known to have been in existence during the 1st century AD, and is generally thought to have been constructed between the reigns of Emperor Nero and Vespasian. Quote, "Thanks to the discovery of Roman terra sigillata pottery and thin walls, the construction of the Tower of Hercules was made in the period between the reigns of Nero and Vespasian, between the 40s and 80s." End quote. The tower has undergone numerous renovations and expansions over the ages, with the Roman construction making up 36 of its current 57 metres in height. Its current external aspect was an addition dating to the 18th century, and the base of the tower contains a cornerstone crediting the Roman design to one Gaius Servius Lupus, and dedicates the tower as an offering to the Roman god of war, Mars. The original design is described as follows. Quote, "Originally the tower had a prismatic body with a square base and fitted with a helical recessed staircase. 2 walls with which the place of the luminaire was accessed, located on a platform that reached 70 metres above sea level. Counting the outer wall, which disappeared at the end of the Middle Ages, the tower was 18 metres on each side and was built on a platform of which some remains can be found. The core is hollow with internal cross-shaped walls that divide the space into 4 sections, rooms and 3 floors." End quote. While the construction of the tower is largely credited to the Romans, there are numerous sources which say the Roman structure may have been built on top of or replaced an existing, older structure, which is often thought to be of Phoenician origin. Here is what the Britannica has to say. Quote, "The Tower of Hercules is probably the only ancient Roman lighthouse still in use, and is named for one of the most famous heroes of Greek and Roman mythology. The tower stands at the entrance of A Coruña harbour in the autonomous community of Galicia in northwestern Spain. A Phoenician tower may have occupied the site originally. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2009. End quote. The fact that the Roman tower is described as being built on the site of an older structure is certainly an interesting point to consider, as Irish mythology states that the tower was originally constructed by Breoghan or Brigus, a descendant of Fenius, Scotia and Goídel Glas, and an ancestor of the Gaels and Scots. As we have discussed in a previous episode, which you can check out here, Breoghan is also described as being a leader of a group of people called the Brigantes, who were indeed found in Spain, Britain, Ireland and elsewhere in Europe, and he is credited as founding a city named Brigantium in the region in which the tower was constructed. The Book of Invasions also tells us that it was from this tower which Breoghan's son Eth first spotted Ireland. Quote, "Brath then had a good son named Breoghan, by whom was built the tower and the city. Braganza was the city's name. From Breoghan's tower it was that Ireland was seen. An evening of a day of winter, Ith, son of Breoghan, saw it." End quote. The first historical account of the tower comes from the works of Paulus or Roscius, a Roman priest, historian and student of Augustine of Hippo. Writing in the early 400s AD in his work Historiae Adversum Paganos, or History Against the Pagans, Paulus seemingly confirms that the city in which the tower was constructed was indeed called Brigantia, and says the tower looked out towards Britain, and describes it as one of the most notable structures in the world at the time. Quote, "There in Galicia is situated the city of Brigantia, which raises its towering lighthouse, one of the most notable structures in the world, looking out towards Britain." End quote. The Roman name for the tower, Flavum Brigantium, is also confirmed in the works of Ptolemæus. Quote, "Of the Gallici Lucensi in the great harbour, Flavum Brigantium." End quote. The tower's modern name, the Tower of Hercules, also seems to have some connection to Greek mythology, specifically the 10th labour of Hercules. In this labour, Hercules is tasked with travelling to Ereutheia to obtain the cattle of the three-bodied giant, Geryon. As Pliny tells us, Ereutheia, the name of one of the Hesperides, was applied to the island off the southwest coast of Spain, which would become the Punic colony of Godeira, modern-day Cadiz. Quote, "On the side which looks towards Spain at about 100 paces distant is another long island, 3 miles wide, on which the original city of Gades stood. By Ephorus and Philistides it is called Ereutheia, by Timaeus and Silenus Aphrodisias, and by the natives, the Isle of Juno." End quote. However, according to the local myth, which seemingly blends Celtic and Greek mythology, Hercules kills the giant Geryon after 3 days and 3 nights of relentless battle. Hercules the victor then takes the head of Geryon and in traditional Celtic gesture buries it alongside his weapons and orders a city to be built on the site. This motif can be found on the coat of arms of the city of A Coruña, which features a depiction of the tower standing on top of a skull and crossbones, which is representative of the severed head of Geryon. In the Bibliotheca Manuscript Stoensis, written by Charles O'Connor in 1818, he comments on Paulus Orosius, whose source we looked at earlier, and discusses the connection between the tower and Hercules. Quote, "With respect to Orosius, there can be but one opinion, that he was one of the most learned men of the 5th century. A Spaniard by birth and thoroughly acquainted with the history of his country, and he mentions the Pharos of Brigantia to have been of such antiquity that it was believed to have been founded by the Tyrian Hercules in the remote ages of Phoenician navigation. Now Pliny informs us that the Tyrian Hercules was Midacritus, who first discovered the British Islands. If then Orosius be united with Pliny, and both with the Irish bards, the historical fact will be found to be this: that the first Phoenician discoverers built this lofty pharos ad speculum Britanniae to serve as a landmark for their ships in their bold attempts to sail directly for the British Islands, which was done in 2 or 3 days, whilst a coasting voyage demanded 2 months. Cluver remarks on the Pharos of Brigantia, and says that the present seaport of Faro derives its name from it, and that the Romans called it Flavia Brigantium. It is remarkable that the word Faro in Irish means be on the lookout, be careful, and that a line from Brigantia in Ireland, now Waterford, to Brigantia in Spain would pass close by the Scilly Islands in a direct course, and from Coruña in the same course along the banks of the Ebro to the Mediterranean." End quote. Looking through the works of Pliny, however, I am unable to find the quote mentioned by O'Connor which links Midacritus to the Tyrian Hercules. The quote does, however, mention Midacritus to be the first person to bring tin from the Cassiterides, which meant tin islands to the ancient Greeks. Quote, "Tin was first imported by Midacritus from the island of Cassiteris." End quote. These tin islands are sometimes identified as the Isles of Scilly, located off the southwest coast of Cornwall, which were just mentioned by O'Connor in the previous quote. If you want to hear more about this topic, then please check out my series, The Phoenicians in Britain, here. It is worth considering, however, that the translators of Pliny, Henry T. Riley and John Bostock, comment that there are no accounts of the name Midacritus which appear elsewhere. They go on to state that it was speculated by French scholar of classics Jean Hardouin that it could have been a substitute for Midas Phrygius instead, but I must reiterate that this notion seems to be speculative at best. Quote, "We have no account of any individual bearing this name, and it has been proposed by Hardouin to substitute for it Midas Phrygius, who is said, both by Hyginus and by Cassiodorus, to have been the discoverer of lead." End quote. Finally, there is a source by Roman geographer Pomponius Mela, which says that Hercules was buried on the island of Cadiz, and that a temple dedicated to him was established by the Tyrians during the Trojan era. Quote, "Next to these shores lie many obscure islands that have no names. Of these islands not happily passed by though, Gades is on the strait. That island is separated from the continent by a narrow space as if by a river, and has an almost straight bank where it lies nearer to the mainland. Where the island faces the ocean, it reaches into the sea with two promontories, and the shoreline in between recedes. On one prong, it supports a temple of Egyptian Hercules, famous for its founders, its cult, its age, and its wealth. The Tyrians founded the temple, and Hercules' bones buried there show why the place is consecrated. The temple began its existence in the Trojan era, and time has fed its wealth." End quote. So what is really going on here? Why are the Brigantes and Celtic mythology seemingly intertwined with Hercules and Greek mythology, as well as that of the Phoenicians? As we have already discussed in a previous episode, Fenius from Irish mythology has many similarities to Phoenix from Greek mythology. Greek Phoenix is described as a king of Thrace, whose brother or cousin, the Phoenician hero Cadmus, is credited as first bringing the Phoenician letters to the Greeks. In one source, one of the sons of Greek Phoenix is named Clutius, which is a name that can be found on 15 inscriptions in the Celtic regions of Spain. Some sources also connect the Brigantes from Spain, who were also known as the Brigis, Brigues and Brigades, with a group of people who were known as the Briges, whom Herodotus says moved from Thrace to Asia Minor, where they then became known as Phrygians. Another interesting point to consider is that in some accounts it is said that the sons of Greek Phoenix were rescued by Hercules and the Argonauts and subsequently joined them on their sea voyage. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and we will continue this journey in the next episode. Thanks again for watching and for all the continued support. Catch you on the next one. Old Boy out.